Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Between Tides podcast. My name is Allison, and we are so glad that you can be with us today. Whether you're a certified fan or it's your first time joining us, the goal of our podcast is actually pretty simple. We hope to educate, encourage, and inspire our audience to become just a little smarter after listening to each episode. Today, I'm joined by my co host, Michelle. Say hi, Michelle. And we're pleased to welcome our guest, Nick Raught and Vasilios Rizos, who are some certified financial planners who are going to give us some certified financial information for those of you who might just be starting out in your financial planning life. So, welcome. We're glad to have you here with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
We think about people who are college age or post college age, didn't go to college, they're sort of in their 20s. They're right at the beginning of their sort of career life, earning life. And if they have school debt, trade school debt, college debt, or if they're fortunate and they don't, and they have their first job and they're thinking about investing, saving. But when we think about different stages of financial planning, we definitely want to start with someone who's young and just starting out. And if you guys could maybe introduce yourselves and give us a reason why we asked you to come on and talk about the subject, that'd be good. Yeah. So Vasilios, you wanna lead?
Yeah, I'm Vasilios Rizos, financial advisor, and in my capacity, we help people in all different stages. I think it was exciting you all having us on and targeting the conversation in different chunks
Mhm.
because it does look a lot different for someone starting out their career, someone in the middle, and then someone nearing retirement and through retirement. So, excited to be here. But I'm a certified financial planner. I hold the chartered financial analyst designation. So, um, that's, I guess, some of my cred.
Yeah, nice. And how about you, Nick?
Yeah, first, thanks for having us on. And my name is Nick Rott, and I'm a certified financial planner. And yeah, I think this is really good. And like Vasily said, it's very different based upon where people are in the stages of life,
Yeah.
what advice applies to them.
Mhm.
So breaking this up in different sections is, I believe, a really good idea. And we're excited to hopefully be on here a couple times. So
Yeah,
thanks for
well,
having us.
we're excited too. And Michelle, you're the perfect host for this episode because you're kind of pretty close right in the middle of that time frame or that age frame.
Yeah, I'm 27,
Yeah.
so not
So
quite just out of college, but not really in the middle of my career either.
yeah, just sort of on the starting end.
Mhm.
And is this something like, is this a topic that you and your husband have talked about? How you want to plan things out, different financial goals that you have for different stages?
A little bit, well, actually a lot, yeah. Um, right now, I'll just get into the whole thing. So, we recently bought a house last September, and the way that we've done everything has been timing all of it. So, we didn't get engaged or married right out of college. We waited a couple of years, which I was initially really annoyed about, but it ended up working out. And then we got a house shortly after that. And then we didn't buy a brand new car anytime soon. Like we got one, I think, a month or two ago, but it wasn't new, it was used. And we don't have any kids yet, and we don't
Mhm.
want any kids until a couple of years because, like, thank God, before we got married, we were able to pay off our financial, or what do you call it? Like our student loans.
Mhm.
And right now we're working on paying off the house and the car. And then after that, like, if things go the way that they've been going, in 5 or 6 years, we'll be able to not have any debt and then we'll start having kids.
Yeah,
So we talk about it, but not like on a weekly basis or even like in a planning way. It's kind of just like, oh, here's the update with the mortgage kind of a thing.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's so much information in our world today. So you can get on and you can search online what are good financial practices for a 25-year-old, and you get a mass of information. So if Michelle and Mark or, a person in that kind of age frame will come to you and say, what should I be doing? I have, you're very fortunate or smart that you've paid down your college debt. But if you have someone come to you and they're maybe 24, 25, they have a standard amount of college debt, which I don't even know what that is today. They are just starting out in their career. Maybe they've got a year or two under their belt. what are they what kind of framework are they gonna use to make decisions? What would they say to you, and what would you maybe advise them to do?
Yeah. So first, congratulations, and
Thanks.
congratulations on actually thinking about it. I would say, and for the listeners out there, that's probably atypical. I would say most people aren't giving it that much thought, especially earlier on. Um,
That was definitely Mark. I can't take all the credit for that one. It's
but it's
good
still
though.
good you thought about it and you're planning for it and you're being active with it. So I would say some of the first steps typically when younger people reach out to us, one, it's exciting because the earlier you get started, the better off you'll be.
Mhm.
I can assure you that, right? There's not many things that we can assure in our business, but the earlier you get started, the better planning you can do. And it may not be the perfect situation, right? Sometimes it's tough decisions that have to be made, but the better off you'll be. So, people in their early 20s looks different for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Some people are fortunate, they got scholarships, their parents handled um, their education for them, some don't.
Mhm.
Some immediately went into the trades. They might come out at 22, 23, working for one of the local plants and making six figures.
Mhm.
Ultimately, for us, it's first steps having that conversation. Are you married? Do you want children? Do you have debt? What's the whole picture look like?
Right.
Um, Nothing is done in our world in a vacuum or isolated. We really have to understand the whole picture. So, at the beginning, it's almost like an interview like this.
Mhm.
We actually should get these for
Right.
our meetings, make it a little bit more official. But the first thing's laying out where you're at, being honest with yourself, right? What are those goals? What's realistic? Do you like your job? Do you not? There's going to be a lot of changes in your early years. Starting out relationships, maybe you meet someone. What do their finances look like? Maybe you're not in debt. Maybe your partner is. Um,
Yeah, that's a good point because it's gonna look different if you're a single person versus perhaps sharing some or all of your incoming or income and financial decisions with a partner.
yeah, it's definitely there's different avenues, right? And you're going to be on one track. And if you're a single person and if you meet someone, there's going to be different avenues to go toward. But I would say first laying everything out, having some goals, reaching out to advisors at an early point's really important because oftentimes there's a lack of financial education, especially in elementary and high school. Some colleges implementing it. I was actually teaching assistant at the university I went to for a personal finance course, which was nice.
That's great.
Engineering students, medical students. It was really a wide range of different people attending, but most people have no idea. So seeking out someone is really important. And being honest with yourself with the goals and the situation you're in, right? If you're heavy in debt and you have a low salary, like you got to be honest with yourself. And maybe it means cutting back in other areas.
No
Um,
avocado toast
no
every
avocado toast. Yeah, the popular, you know, if you save on your cup of coffee every day, you'll be a billionaire. But
Is that true?
no, it's all a balance. But I would say honesty with yourself is important in seeking out someone. And Nick, I'll toss it to you for your
Yeah,
advice.
I think the biggest thing is just coming up with goals and make
Mm,
sure that your financial plan is led by goals, right?
okay.
Because if you're saying, "Hey, I'm just going to invest to invest," well, what are we investing for, right? You want to be investing differently if you're trying to, save for retirement versus, "Hey, we're going to need this monies in 3 years." Right?
Okay.
You have to have goals for these monies, and there might be different types of accounts that you would use based upon that. You need to make sure that you protect your family if you have a family in
Mhm.
regards to insurances, things of that nature. And two, I think the biggest thing just coming out of school is when you get that first job, learning to live within your means, right? Because
That is
that's
so true.
that's the hardest part, right? And especially when folks get married too, that's a big conversation to have because one spouse might have a different idea of living in means than the other spouse, right?
There's usually, like, in every relationship, there's one spender and one saver. Do you
Yeah.
think that's true?
Oh,
Which are
yeah.
you?
I'm the spender.
Yeah, me too. I'm totally the
100%.
spender. I use a lot of girl math, like, I saved $10 on this item, so that's $10 I have to spend on
Yeah.
avocado toast or whatever.
It makes it so much more special though whenever the other one is like, "I think we should get ice cream tonight." Then it's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm not the problem. Let's go."
I am the problem, it's me.
I am too.
Yeah, I recently learned that from my wife. If you return something, it was free money. I didn't know that.
Absolutely.
I
See,
didn't
you learn
know, but
That's on the
she
job
something.
had
knowledge.
educated me on that, which was nice.
It's true, and that's a big part of kind of sharing your life with someone else is figuring out how you balance that and make it work and not argue all the time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think it's important to realize that spouses value things differently.
Mhm.
Like, one spouse might value avocado toast, right? And the other spouse may not see the value in that, right?
Right.
But it's all it doesn't mean you can't purchase, an expensive cup of coffee, right? But you need to sacrifice in other areas because that's something that you value,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, and also too, I just see more and more with younger people the sharing of finances
Mhm.
between spouses. It's
Okay.
not as common as it was for older folks.
Sure.
I feel like everybody, uh, not our elderly clients, but all of our
Gen X? You
Gen
could
X,
say
thank
it,
you.
the older yeah, I get it. Mhm.
It was just assumed that when you got married, you share finances,
Right.
right? And it's all one picture. Some I don't see that as much with millennials or Gen Y, that's the same type of case. So
Mhm.
I think it's just important, when you're working with your spouse,
Mhm.
just to make sure, hey, you're on the same page
Sure.
and make sure that you talk about those values with each other to
Yeah.
say, hey, maybe one spouse wants to retire at 55 and that's really important to them. Well, if that's something they value, where can the sacrifices be made or what do they need to be doing to reach that goal?
Okay.
Mhm.
So,
So when someone would come to you for the first time, what obviously they can come to you and get advice on investments and get advice on, portfolios. And I'm acting like I know what I'm talking
I was
about. I
impressed
just
with the
hear
word
these
Those are
words and
good
they
portfolio.
sound
buzzwords, yeah.
financy. Um, but you know, what kind of nitty-gritty advice can you give? Like, can you help someone set up a monthly budget if they're like, I've never done this before. I don't know how to live within my means because this is new to me. Are you able to provide more than just investment advice?
yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. First, I'm gonna say my wife is a very good saver, so the girl
Okay.
math example I got or that I gave
Yeah.
is not applicable, so I'm just
Perfect.
gonna
See, I
cover my
like it.
bases there, yes, covering my bases. No, there is, financial advisors, that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
And it's important to know, so maybe just to give a little bit of background information, there's all different types of financial advisors and everything. And I think it's important when younger people are seeking that advice to understand there's some that are more investment focused, a little bit less on the planning, some geared toward, the tax side of things, right? When you're looking for someone and you're browsing websites and everything, just try to find someone who looks pretty holistic, right? They're not harping specifically on investment management or one thing or another
Okay.
because you're really trying to find someone who can help with the whole picture.
Mhm.
And so, oftentimes, and that's one where you find the niche a little bit more is people who are more investment management than financial planners. I would say, if you're younger, find someone who does look at the whole planning aspect. So, um, I forgot your question.
Well, like when I think of financial planning, I do think of investments, but there's
Mhm.
also, can you help me do my taxes? Can you help me come up with a monthly budget that I can make work for me? Um, can you help me to know how to pay down debt maybe a little bit more quickly? I mean, I'm even thinking of my kids who are all sort of in that enter into the workforce phase. The first time someone fills out their W-2 paperwork at work, I have to ask how to file. I don't know. Is it a 0? Is it a 1? I don't know what any of that means.
Right.
So is that something where I could go to a financial planner such as yourself and you could help me with that? Are there all of those levels of service, I guess?
Yeah, so it depends on the firm that you work for or work with,
Mhm.
right? Some advisors are different than others, right? Like we had met with somebody who recently graduated college, and they were just seeking advice. Okay, am I doing the right things?
Mhm.
What I found online, doing some research, saying these are my goals. Am I doing the right things? Right? Because there's some benchmarks to associate with. For example, you want to have some type of emergency fund
Right.
for, if you lost your job or something happened, you own a home and a furnace went, right?
Mhm.
You want to have that monies aside that you wouldn't have to put that on a credit card.
Right.
So you want to have 3 to 6 months of your discretionary living expenses.
Mhm.
Right, so that's one thing when you meet with somebody, you wanna make sure, hey, they're actually looking at that because you don't wanna just say, "Okay, well, how can we invest the money?"
Yeah.
Right? We gotta make sure that bases are covered first, right? Also, if retirement is one of your goals, which most people it is a goal, some people say they do wanna work for the rest of their lives, but just having that comfort of knowing that you can retire at a certain age, and it depends when you start saving for retirement too,
Mhm.
right? If you start in your 20s, you want to be saving 10 to 15% of your income between you and your employer to live that same type of lifestyle and retirement that you're living at this point in time,
Gotcha.
right? And then there's some benchmarks to follow too to say, hey, by the time you're 30, in retirement assets, you want to have about 1 times your salary.
Okay.
And then at age 40, you wanna have 2 times your salary.
Okay.
So there's when you meet with somebody at the beginning and you may say, "Hey, I don't have any assets for a financial planner to manage," I guess that's what the question really is, will somebody still help me?
Yeah.
Right? And firms charge differently. Some people say, "Well, if that's the case, we could charge like a one time to come up with a plan for you."
Mhm.
Or if you just wanted some direction, like the person we had met with, it was just to say, "Hey, can you give me some advice. Am I doing the right thing?"
Yeah.
We sat down with this person, had the conversation, and said, "Hey, these are the things you need to be doing." We didn't charge for like an initial consultation or anything
Sure.
like that. It was just to, put point them in the right direction,
Yeah.
right? Um,
And really, I mean, from a client standpoint, that's fantastic because then when they do have some assets to manage, they're going to come back to
For
you
sure.
because you've built some trust and some, credibility with
yeah,
that person. And that's ideal, I think. Like looking at my kids saying, you need to go meet with someone because they're going to at least give you some benchmarks, do a little maybe a generic physical on your general financial health where you are right now. And then later on, you can go back to them for more of the investment side of things and planning for that future.
yeah,
Yeah, I love that.
I think, a caution too, um, getting advice off TikTok or Instagram, some
There's a
of
lot
it's
of that.
some of it's good, some of it's not. Typically they're just trying to throw out buzzwords or, really minute details that don't really pertain to most people. Oh, hey, you starting a side business, you could do this. And it's like, okay, you might be able to do that
Yeah.
in a
Little
Keep it
particular
side
case,
hustle.
but that is not a one, size fits all approach to it. So if you do hear something online, it's good educate yourself, hear information from various sources. I encourage people, like, don't stick with one um, resource
Gotcha.
for things, right? Some people are really big into, like, Dave Ramsey or someone in particular, and it's,
Right.
diversify your education, read different sources, but also be careful with what you're listening to because the quick hits on TikTok are made to get views and to, right,
Right.
have a pop factor to them. And it may not always be applicable. That's, one of the first things typically when we sit down with someone, we're having conversations, and then they always have their few questions. They're like, "Well, what about this? I
Mhm.
heard this. Is that, does that work for me or this and that?" So it's good to know some of those things, but
Yeah.
also don't take it for gospel because in the financial world, it's personal finance, right? It's personal for
Yes,
everyone, and
it's
everyone is
nuanced.
doing something different. Yeah.
It's kinda like when I go to my doctor and I've already Googled like, one of my symptoms, and I've gone on WebMD, and I'm like, "I know you're gonna have to amputate my foot because clearly I have a deep thrombosis embolism." I don't even know if that's a thing. And they're like, Maybe do a little less internet
Yeah, you have
sleuthing
the
and just
common cold,
come back."
actually.
Right. "You're fine,
Yeah.
you're just getting old and it's arthritis." Like,
Yeah.
"No."
It is wild how, like, for medicine, for example, it's been around for decades, and there's people in the field who know what's right and what's wrong. So, like, in your mind, you're like, okay, research online should today be as accurate as it's ever been before. But then you go online and you get like a result like that, and you're convinced, yeah, I have foot cancer and I have to
Right.
amputate the whole thing, even though it's probably just a cold.
Yeah.
Like, how does that happen?
I just think it's because of the sheer volume of stuff out there. And like you said, you could be scrolling on TikTok and read something and it's completely false. I mean, you just do
Yeah.
a simple search and realize that
Mhm.
it's false. But there's so much information and it's just impossible to like sift through that for the layperson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of in that same vein, if you guys can answer this, what's one piece of financial like misinformation that you keep hearing and you're like, no, where is this coming from? Like, this is not right at all. Is there anything like that? Like, if you save pennies a day, you'll be retired by the time you're
Yeah. Like if
63.
I
Well,
never eat avocado toast, I can retire at 40.
Right.
yeah, that is one where I think, you know, people again, people value things differently, right? And just to say, "Hey, you know, don't spend any money, save all your money, and you can retire at age 40." And there are people out there that wanna do that. The acronym for them is FIRE, I can't remember.
Financially independent, retire early.
Yeah, there you
Yeah.
go.
Oh,
I have a
okay.
friend
But
who's on that path.
and that's their goal, and if that's their goal, they don't want that cup of coffee or they don't want that
Sure.
avocado toast. So, everybody is different and unique in that
Hmm.
aspect, right? Just I think one thing is don't think if you're talking to a peer that their situation is similar to your situation, right? And assume what's right for them is right for you.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's good advice.
And I would say one other people tend to only talk about their winners and not their
Yes.
losers, right? So be
Yes.
careful on the advice that you take from folks, because they might not tell the full story.
Sure.
So
Yeah, that's really good advice. I think that there's so much we're kind of like in this all or nothing space. I feel like for a lot of people. Like you were just talking about that person who's so fixed on this specific goal that he or she is going to spend no money, they're never going to go out, they're never going on vacation. Um Most people are just not going to want to live like that. They
yeah,
want to have some realistic goals. And so I guess a person could come to you with a heavy load of debt and maybe not a very high income and say, I feel like I'm never, ever going to get ahead. I'm just one catastrophe away from living on the street or living in my car. What I know that, you're not here to give specific advice, but generally speaking, if someone came to you and said, okay, I have this debt and I have this limited income, what's my priority? Is my priority to pay down debt and do that before I start saving or investing, or should I be investing even just a small amount right now while I'm still trying to pay down that debt? Like generally speaking, what's that kind of rule of thumb that you would suggest is wise?
yeah, it depends on the rate on the debt, right?
Okay.
If somebody had a mortgage that was a 3% debt, right?
Mhm.
And you say, "Hey, you know, right now that's a low interest rate
Heck
compared
yeah.
to."
If you've got 3%,
I know.
don't ever sell.
Genuinely.
Right. So, investing may make more sense for that person opposed to paying off that debt.
Mhm.
But again, there's different people that say, "Hey, debt keeps me up at night."
Yeah.
Right? And they wanna have debt paid off as quickly as possible. And, yeah, I always say, "Well, if you're not sleeping at night, you're not gonna live very long, so what
Oh,
are
yeah.
you really saving for?" Right?
Yeah.
You gotta do what is your goals, and that's why goals are so important when you're doing financial planning.
Yeah.
So you want to evaluate the rate on the debt, what kind of debt it is versus, if it was credit card debt and it could be north of 20%, that may make some more sense to, pay off that debt opposed to investing, right?
Yeah, that's a
It,
good
it
point.
it just all depends on the type of debt out there. And, it depends to, hey, what are you saving in? Are you saving in a
Mhm.
retirement plan where you have to save a certain amount to get a match
Yeah.
or a profit share or other things out there,
Yeah.
right? And be, aligned in that way. So everybody, again, I hate to keep saying everybody's
No.
different, right?
Well, that's why you
Um,
exist. That's because if there
right.
was a one size fits all, then we
Right.
wouldn't need you. I know that when my husband and I were young, probably for the first, I would say, first 15 years of our marriage, our debt was high. We had school debt, we had some credit card debt, and our income was not high. And
Yeah.
so it was a real challenge to navigate. We just were always living on a very, very tight budget so that we could pay down that debt as soon as possible. And I'm not a financial planner. So I'm going to put that disclaimer out there, but I am going to give a little piece of advice here that people may not know when they're younger is that you can often negotiate your debt. You can contact, the agency that's holding your school loans, or if you have medical debt, you can contact the hospital. You can even negotiate sometimes with medical things, the cost of the procedure. And people don't realize that. We found that out accidentally. We once had a medical bill completely forgiven simply because my husband called and said, "This is a large bill for us. Can we negotiate like a lower payment plan, or is there any forgiveness amount?" And they were able to forgive the entire amount.
Wow.
And people don't realize that. Even I worked for a collections attorney yonks ago, and people don't realize that credit agencies or agencies that hold your debt, what they don't want is for you to default on the loan. That's kind of worst case scenario for everybody. And so you can often contact whoever's holding your school debt or whatever that debt is. I'm not so sure that this works as well with credit card companies. But you can negotiate maybe a lower payment plan or negotiate the interest rate a little bit. Sometimes they'll forgive a portion of the debt. So it is always, always worthwhile to call and ask because sometimes there is some forgiveness in there that you can take advantage of could be based on your income, it could be based on other things, but that's my little from the very little I know about the subject, that's my piece of advice.
Real
Yeah.
quick, what does default on the loan mean? Does that just mean like paying the minimum?
No, that means that you don't pay it at all.
Why would that be the default?
I don't know why it's called default. Am I
It's
that's
different than like the default. Like I have a bunch of options, and this is a default. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
when you
you committed
can't pay on.
default.
Yeah, you defaulted on the loan, right? You
Thank you.
yeah. And if you do default on the loan, then it's gonna go to collections, and then there are going to be lawyers' fees and additional
yeah,
fees on
your
top
Oh
of
my
credit
that.
gets
gosh.
hit. So I think
Yeah.
that's a good segue. An important thing for younger people, credit is something that's really foreign, right? They don't understand it. Student debt sometimes, if it's in their name, is the first way people are getting credit sometimes on
Mhm.
campus. I don't know if it's still allowed, but there'd be banks or people trying to help college students open up credit cards and everything.
Oh, I think it's
Um,
still happening.
yeah, okay.
I avoided those people like the plague.
Smart girl.
Building credit
Scary.
is good, right? Not all debt is bad debt, right? You have to have some debt and everything to help build credit, right? For
Right.
me, actually, one of the things that hurts my credit score is I don't have enough um, lines of credit, like things
Yep.
open, right? I
Mhm.
only have a few. And so just be careful with it. There's tools online, and I won't throw out any immediately, but that you can check your credit score for free. You can
Mhm.
actually go to the direct TransUnion Experian and I'm drawing a blank on the third,
Yeah, what's the other?
Equifax.
Mhm.
where you can check your scores once a year
Mhm.
for free. So use those tools, but building credit is really important. It's like the Coca-Cola recipe. Nobody really knows
Yeah.
how it's calculated, right? There's a fine balance of having debt outstanding versus having too much or too little. Making sure you're paying on time is one that's really
Yep.
important. Make sure if you have loan payments, you're making them, you're not defaulting.
Yeah.
Um, that's one important thing I think for younger people is maintaining good credit. That will affect you
Mhm.
with rates down the line, not only getting a mortgage, but the rate that could be the difference between, 6.5 or a 7% interest rate. That's
Yeah.
the little tweaks, right? Oh, I took out this credit card when I was 22. I didn't really pay on it. Now my credit scores, 600.
Yeah.
Well, that might cost you a half a percent on your loan. That's going to be a lot of
It's
dollars in the future you
a
didn't
lot of
realize,
money. Oh
right?
boy.
Um, so one thing that I would definitely say, do a little research on the topic, find tools online to help you. Some bank accounts, like my bank, I can check my FICO score
Hmm.
right through the app, but keep a gauge on that.
What's a FICO score for our audience and a little bit for me? I know, I mean, I've heard of it, but I don't really know what it is.
Yeah, it's one of the credit. Your credit, when you look at the different credit providers, are not all the same exact score.
Okay.
Your FICO score is one of them that is used, and different banks or lending institutions might pull like all three or one or the other.
Okay.
But I believe the top credit scores 850,
Yeah, 850.
850.
Hmm.
FICO is just one of them. I don't know if you know anything specific about.
No, I mean, going into the calculation too, and one thing I was gonna say is make sure you also pay your credit cards, any debt you have on time. Because one thing that adds up big time too is late fees,
Hmm.
right? And that's really just that's not helping you in any way. That's
Mm-mm.
just money going out the door. So making sure that you set things up on auto pay if you can,
Yep.
right? And if it makes sense for you, but having those add up over time really adds up, and it does hurt your credit score when you do have a late payment.
Yeah, and another piece of that is that can help you with setting up your budget. Is if you do those auto pays, then it's like that's not money I have to spend. That I know where that's going, and that helps you kind of be a little bit more mindful of where you have to stay.
Mhm.
I know for our oldest son, he bought a house a couple of years ago, and initially when he started talking about wanting to do that, he didn't have a credit score because he had no debt. I mean, he'd gone to the military, he had no school debt. He was smart about all of that, but it hurt him in the credit
Yeah.
score department. And so we advised him to get one credit card and to use that for his monthly expenses, but use it like a debit card so that every month he was paying off the entire amount on the credit card. And within 6 months, I think 6 or 8 months, he had a good credit score and he was able to then move forward and get, at the time, a really good interest rate. I think he's below 4% as well. Um, but yeah, you can do kind of all of the right things, but if you don't know the ins and outs of building that credit score, it is going to hurt you for something like a home purchase. So that's a really
Yeah.
good piece of advice. Yeah.
Yeah, and
You oh, you go first.
okay, I can use a personal example. I remember when I went to go buy my first car, I didn't have any credit at all. I had a job. I was living at home.
Hmm.
One of my goals was when I graduated college, I wanted to buy a house. So what I had decided to do was I was going to live at home, save what I can, and I didn't have any bills or anything in my name. And I went to go get a car, and they were like, "Well, we don't think we're going to
Womp
be able to give you
womp.
a loan." And I was like, "Well, I don't have any debts out there. What are you worried
I'm a
about?"
nice guy. Come on.
They were like, "Well, you don't have any credit history
Yeah.
at all." Right? And then because I didn't have a credit card at the
Hmm.
time, and these were things, I wasn't even licensed to be a financial planner at that time. So it was something I was still, learning,
Sure.
going through the process. And it made it very difficult to get that first car loan. And I mean, this was back when the interest rate environment was much different back in 2016. But I think my first car loan rate was like at 9%. And Yeah, and it was, there was still offers out there for very low interest rates,
Mhm.
but having no credit. And then I got my first credit card, made sure I paid it off every month.
Yeah.
But also, the longevity of debt is one of those factors in
Mhm.
that FICO score too.
Okay.
So you want to
What do you mean by longevity of debt? How long you've carried that debt?
correct,
Okay.
and your payments on that, but also too, one of the factors you may want to consider before like canceling a credit card is that that's your longest um,
Mm.
trail, so to speak, of having good payments towards that credit card every month.
Yeah.
Because if you close that, that could have a negative effect on your FICO score.
Yeah.
So there's always considerations when making any type of financial decision in that aspect. So
Yeah, and along, back to the negotiating rates topic, if you have a long-standing credit card that you have paid timely on and you have a good history on that credit card, sometimes you can negotiate an interest rate, you can negotiate a late fee if you did maybe forget to make your payment on time. Um, a credit card company should want to keep, you know, someone like you if you're a good bet for them. And so that gives you some negotiating power as well. I like negotiating things.
I think that, a lot of younger people aren't used to negotiating, bartering, things like that, right?
Yes, that's so
Also, the
true.
fear
Because
of rejection.
Yeah.
what was that?
I said it's also the fear of rejection.
Well, yeah.
You gotta
But,
thicken that skin.
I know.
whether it be your first job,
Yeah.
negotiate, right? Negotiate salary. A lot of people feel like, well, I'm just happy to have it.
Yep.
Most people aren't going to retract an offer if you push back a little bit, right?
Mhm.
They may even like to see that you have a little bit of grit in you to push back on their offer. You can
Yeah.
negotiate soft perks like working from home, right? A few remote
Mhm.
days if it wasn't remote. You can negotiate all sorts of things, like you said, if you're in a situation where you have a lot of debts. Now, don't rack up your credit card and be like, "I'll just negotiate it later." That
Yeah, that's not what
fine,
we're
yeah,
saying.
fine line there. But I do think that that is an art form that's a bit lost on the
Yeah.
younger generation because we haven't been exposed to it. I know, right? My dad and his friends, right, they'll negotiate with each other, sell each
Yep.
other things, and right, they're always sort of bartering with each other. And for the younger crowd, it's not like that. You go to your store, you
Yep.
buy something, it's not negotiable, right?
Mhm.
Unless you go maybe to Europe and you're trying to buy a knickknack or something, you're trying to negotiate there. That's like the most exposure young people really may have
Yeah.
to being able to negotiate a price or something. But don't be fearful to do it, and especially in the workplace. Um, if it is your first offer out of school, it doesn't mean that they're not willing to give you a little bit of a pay bump, or
Mhm.
they're not willing to give you an extra week of vacation or an extra few days or 1 day remote. Um, Push
Yeah, it's
back, right?
possible they're even giving you that starting salary with the full knowledge that it's the starting point to the negotiation.
Yeah.
So, I do think that is a generational thing. I remember, being somewhere at some store, like a boutique, type store, and I was negotiating with the owner on an item's price, like, "Well, could you do any better on this?" And my daughter, who was, I think, in high school at the time, was super embarrassed. Like, when we left, she was like, "I can't believe you did that. That's so embarrassing." And I was like, "What? It worked. She came down." I mean, she knows what it's worth, and she knows what she can come down to, and I know what I'm willing to pay and what I think it's worth. If we can find a place to meet, that's great, and if not, that's okay too. Like, nobody takes that personally, or most people shouldn't take that personally because they understand that's sort of how it can work. But I do think that's a generational thing that maybe, Gen Z, Gen Y, even possibly millennial, generations tend to not negotiate as much.
Yeah.
You think
Yeah.
that's true for you?
Yeah, for sure. Like when I graduated college, I graduated May of 2020, so like the height of COVID.
Mm,
And I didn't start working here until the following January. The job offer came in December, but like that's when I started working. Um, and I was applying pretty much only on Indeed. Like I had a LinkedIn, but just so I could see more job listings. And at the end of June, I got a notification and it was like, "Oh, congratulations, you applied to over 200 jobs this month." So
Oof.
I didn't feel like I was really in a position to negotiate because it was such slim pickings.
Yeah.
Also, I didn't mention this, but in those 200 jobs, I only got 4 answers. And they were all some variant of no or how did you find us? We're not even looking for people to work here anymore. So I didn't feel like I had any ground to stand on because it was like nobody's hiring. I'm lucky to get any kind of a job outside of like making popcorn at a movie theater.
Yeah.
So if I get anything, I'll take it and then eventually negotiate.
Yeah.
That's the end of my sentence.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that's fair. And I think that's pretty common depending on what the external situation is at the
Mhm.
time. Yeah. If you're fighting in a job market that is tight and, you're sending out 200 resumes
In a
and
month.
getting one callback, you're probably not going to feel like you're in a real strong negotiating
Right.
position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's the same with probably vehicles, right? If people graduated in 2020s and they needed a car, there was no negotiating. It
No.
was like,
You were lucky if you could
yeah,
get
Right.
something with 4 wheels.
right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
Mhm.
that's the thing. It's like for younger people, they don't really know that that's an option, like negotiating anything.
Yeah.
But the little differences that it may have, I mean, if you can negotiate, 2,000 more dollars on your first salary.
It's huge.
Okay, you're starting out, that's $2,000, but then your next pay increase is based off of that extra
That's so true.
$2,000.
Yeah.
And when you go to your next job, that's 2,000 more dollars. And so you hop up a little bit more. And so that
Yeah.
compounds, right? That little decision when you were 23 to say, hey, can I have, an extra $2,000 or
Yeah. And it gives
if you're able to
you
get something.
it gives you bargaining power for maybe another job at another company at some point. Or maybe your company says, "You know what? We're not in a financial place where we can boost your income or your salary, but we can maybe change your title a little bit to give it a little bit more clout."
Hmm.
So there or like you were talking about those what did you call them?
Perks.
Soft perks, maybe an extra remote day or maybe an allowance for
New shoes. I don't know.
whatever that would look like, but, an extra PTO day, or 2 days in your calendar. So I do think that that's a really good point. There are things besides the dollar amount that you can often bring to the table to negotiate,
Yeah.
and it's not insulting. It's saying, "I know that I have value as an employee, and I'm bringing that to the table too."
Yeah. So 2 things. 1, did you guys all get my default joke earlier?
"Oh, were you joking?"
Yes, I was
I
joking. That
thought
was
you
a
were for
joke.
real.
No, like you committed default, like the fault, like the mistake.
I didn't get it.
All right.
Sorry.
My diary will be hearing about this later. Number 1. Number 2, I saw on Instagram 2 or 3 years ago, this guy was like he's a financial advisor, I think, and he would go around the streets of wherever he lived and he would interview people like, "Oh, what's your credit score?" or like, "How much do you make?" Just like financial questions. And this one guy, I remember he had these fancy pink sunglasses and he was drinking something from Starbucks like this and he was like, "Oh, I don't do credit." And the guy was like, "Oh, that's interesting. What do you mean?" And he was like, "Well, credit's fake. It's all just fake. So I use my credit card like play money and I just don't pay it off." And the guy was like, "What are you talking about?" And then the video ended and I was like, okay, I understand the repercussions of this on a long-term basis, but like short term, what would be so bad about that if this guy lives in the city and doesn't need a car, assuming he pays his rent every month? Why can't you use your credit card like Monopoly money?
Well, if you need to rent an apartment, most people will run a credit check on you.
Oh, let's say he's paying with cash. What if
They'll
he's
They'll
still
still run
in the
credit
yeah?
checks.
application process, they'll run your credit. I mean, it affects way more than just going out and getting a loan. Utility companies will run credit checks on you, make sure you're in good standing because, right, they're providing you gas or electric, and they want to make sure that you're paying them. So it's definitely not just isolated to I live in the city, I don't have a card. Um, it'll default, and eventually that runs out. You hit your credit limits.
Oh, true.
Yep.
Right?
Okay.
The people will come after you, dog the bounty hunter's gonna
Are you serious? Wait, okay.
Well, the
This opened
collections
up a
the
ball.
collections attorney will definitely come after you. I have a little funny story about this is years and years ago in a totally different state, but I worked for this collections attorney, and a lot of her accounts were defaulted, student loans, and they were not typically huge amounts. We're talking under $5,000 in a lot of cases. So not, not a large amount. And so my job would be to either call students or to receive calls in if they were upset because we were garnishing their wages, or we were trying to negotiate a different kind of a payback plan. And I would get the craziest responses. I would get cussed at a lot, actually, not unsurprisingly. But I would have people say, "Oh, that loan paperwork that burned up in a fire, so I thought I didn't have to pay it back."
How convenient.
Right? Or this was my favorite all time. I tell this story a lot. I was talking with this guy on the phone, and he owed, I don't even remember. It wasn't a huge amount. It was like $1,600 he had defaulted on. And I said, "Well, could you pay $40 a month in your, could we make a payment plan?" And he said, "No, no, no, I can't. I cannot afford $40 a month." And I was like, "Okay, could you pay back $10 a week?" And he was like, he thought for a second. And he's all, "Yeah, yeah, I can do $10 a week." And that was a trick that the lawyer told me to try. And I laughed at the time because I didn't think it would work. And I cannot tell you how many times it worked, where they couldn't pay $40 a month, but they could pay $40 a month if I called it $10 a week. So,
Perception.
I mean, there's a lot of financial illiteracy, I would say, still out there. So it's good to have this conversation and
Mhm.
maybe to have it more than once. If someone can't afford, if they say, "Listen, I cannot afford to go to a financial planner," are there any places you would maybe steer them toward? I know maybe not specific resources, but are there any places you would say, you can go to your local whatever and they can give you some, a book or some websites? Are there government websites that they could go to and do some sort of a financial calculator based on their income and their debt, things like that?
Yeah, I would say, before rolling out, just, blanketly saying, "Hey, we can't afford to do that."
Mhm.
You know, reach out to a
Yeah.
couple advisors. Some people might give you a free consultation, and that might be all you need at that time
Mhm.
to get pointed in the right direction. So I would
Okay.
say don't assume that people aren't going to try and help you.
Okay.
A lot of advisors that just like us and that we talk to, there's a lot of people that they meet with
Mhm.
that don't become clients,
Yeah.
but they offer a lot of free resources and help, just like those simple benchmarks that I went over earlier. Say,
Yeah.
hey, you this is what you need to be focusing on
Mhm.
right now, um, and it may be that they are able to do a plan for very inexpensive. It just depends on the firm that you reach out to, and just
Okay.
because you meet with one person and say it didn't go anywhere. Say you came in and they said, "Hey, we really can't help you."
Yeah.
Don't assume that everybody's going to be like that.
Okay.
Um,
Don't give up.
yeah, don't give up. But there's some good websites out there to do your own research.
Mhm.
There's things like Investopedia.
Okay.
um, I know, for, you all, you have a lot of people in the healthcare industry,
Mhm.
right? There's actually a page dedicated to healthcare professionals and
Okay.
financial planning. It's called the White Coat Investor, and it
Okay.
tailors things to someone specifically in that field.
Mhm.
So there's all different types of materials out there, where you can do some of your own research too,
Yeah.
right?
And they're legitimate.
Mhm.
Well, how along those lines, how would I know if I went to, made an appointment, went for an initial consultation? How would I know if, I mean, I would assume that most financial planners are going to be good and going to do a good job, but are there signs of someone that I should avoid them if I walk into the office and, these 2 or 3 things happen during that appointment? I should be like, I don't think this is a place for me."
Yeah. Probably if someone's trying to sell you something immediately,
Okay.
Yeah.
right?
It
You haven't had a really in-depth conversation, but they're already trying to push a product or sell you on something. It's probably a red flag,
Yeah.
I would say, right? And just a initial conversation, you're
Mhm.
getting things. They probably shouldn't be recommending anything for you right off the bat. So
Yeah.
I would say that put up your caution flag on that.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's a
w I
good
would
one.
say somebody that doesn't take the time to get to know you,
Yeah.
right? And just kinda says, "Hey, right off the bat, this is what you need to be doing," without understanding some of that qualitative things, right? Like, maybe your goal right now isn't to save for retirement,
Mhm.
or, maybe the most important thing to you right now is saving for a house in 5 years,
Yeah.
right? If they're not asking those questions to get that qualitative, stuff that you can't just get on a piece of paper, right? Then that could be a red flag.
Yeah. That's probably true in general, right? Like if you go to a doctor and they don't take the time to really get to know you or ask, some in-depth questions, that's probably just good advice
Yeah.
in general.
Yep.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah.
One resource I wanted to throw in as well, Investopedia. It's a website,
Okay.
but let's say you got a job, it's with a startup, and they're giving you, company stock. They have nice short videos on things like
Oh,
90 seconds that kind of use infographics
yeah.
and explain concepts really nicely.
Yeah.
So I would say, in addition to those, Investopedia is kind of a nice way to learn more about a topic, or if it's something you don't understand. Oftentimes they'll have little, quick little videos that put things laid out pretty nicely.
Yeah. That's
That's really
great.
good to know.
Any other questions that you had?
Yes, I have 2 questions.
Oh,
Number 1,
okay.
what is the difference between a fiduciary and a regular old financial advisor?
Yeah, so the word fiduciary means an advisor is required to act in your best interest. Um, so there's multiple ways that you can work with an advisor, but two of the most common are working on a fee basis, where you have an annual fee that you may be paying out of pocket for, or it may be based on a percentage of the assets that you have with an advisor. And when you work with an advisor where you're paying based upon the assets that they're managing on a percentage, the advisor is required to act as a fiduciary in that essence and be doing things in your best interest. Um, there are ways that you could work with an advisor, and it could be where it's called like having a brokerage account. You would pay an upfront front commission instead of paying an ongoing fee, and that may make more sense for folks. The requirement when working in that capacity is to sell a client a suitable product. So there's two ways you can work with an advisor. As we said earlier, Vasily and I are certified financial planners. So somebody with that designation is required to act in the best interest, no matter what capacity they're working with clients in on different types of products. So it doesn't mean that a certified financial planner couldn't do something that made sense to do in a commission type of capacity. It just means they're held to that standard that they're always required to act in your best interest.
Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah, and then my second question, back to the guy that lives in the city and uses his credit card like Monopoly money. What if he lived with friends and paid them rent and, like, he didn't have any bills of his own, like, officially, but he, like, paid other people
I feel like you're
for
asking very
utilities?
specifically. You're looking
I'm
for a
so
loophole.
Does this
curious
does
about
this
this
friend
person.
Well,
look just like you? And
Well, depends on who.
uh,
well, one thing too, they could garnish your wages.
What does that mean?
Hmm.
So, do you want to take that one,
No, go
Allison?
ahead. It's been like
So,
30 years since I worked. I don't know if I would be exactly accurate.
but they could go to your employer
Oh.
and take part of your wages,
Oh
Yeah.
my
Now
gosh.
let's say
depending
the
on the type of
employer,
debt. I don't
though.
know
Well,
what types of debt are able to be garnished,
sure.
right?
Like,
But
let's say this person only uses their credit card for fun. Like, oh, I'm going out to a nice restaurant. I'm going to get coffee. I want fun clothes. Like, just fun, nothing necessary, but they use cash for like legitimate needs. I don't know if this is real, but
yeah, I guess they could continue to not have a job where they couldn't have wages garnished and continue to live off credit cards, but eventually they're no longer going to be approved for any more credit.
wow.
Yeah.
So,
There's a
um,
credit limit on your cards, right? So
Yeah,
r-
5 grand, 10 grand, 20.
right.
So
sure.
once this person uses up all that credit,
Hmm.
and they've paid everything else in cash and they live with their friends
Sure.
and they've changed their name.
Yes, yes, I was gonna ask that next.
Yeah.
Okay. Eventually, they just don't get approved for another credit card and
Wow.
they just have accumulated a ton of debt and are putting themselves in a pretty rough predicament.
Wow.
And they're going to need to go see a financial planner.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Would you have to go to prison for that? Like, if you don't change your ways until you're, like, 50, like, you've been living, like, the way that we were just talking about until you're about 50 years old, and then you're like, "Okay, enough is enough. It's time to be an adult." Can you erase everything that you did, or, like, do you have to go to the big
I
house?
I think they would eventually declare bankruptcy, that they
Yeah.
couldn't have their debts collected, but then, yeah, I believe it's a mark on your credit for 7 years if you declare bankruptcy.
Wow.
Um,
I mean, and that's a significant thing because if you declare bankruptcy, that's going to limit you from major purchases, buying a house, I think. I mean, I think you can't like buy a car, with a loan. I don't even know if you can get a loan. That's going to have a major impact on your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Real quick, what does it exactly mean to declare bankruptcy?
Real
well,
quick.
Yeah,
it's
just
it's
real
it's
quick.
not like when Michael Scott walked in.
I
I
declare.
declare.
So if you were to declare bankruptcy, I'm not sure of the whole process of declaring bankruptcy, but what it does is protect that creditors can't come after their debts. But
And
that is a big black mark, and you know, I don't know all the legality if there still can garnish some wages or things like that, but you're basically saying I can't pay these debts and it stops creditors from coming after you in that aspect. But there are significant ramifications to doing so.
Wow. Yeah, and I do wanna say, like, along those lines, I think that people listening there could be people who have really gotten themselves it could be through no fault of their own, it could be through some significant medical debt or an accident or a liability issue, or it could be some poor decision making that are now sitting in a place where they're kind of living in fear or like you mentioned earlier, not able to sleep at night. Um, I would want us to say, I'd want you guys to say, you can come to us. Like, you don't need to be embarrassed. You don't need to be afraid. We're not going to berate you. We're not going to mock you. We're not going to laugh at you. You're there to help a person, who might be in that situation or to direct them to where they need to go, maybe to get additional help, right?
Oh,
Correct.
absolutely. Yeah. It's like when doctors say don't be embarrassed, I've seen it all where I've seen
Yeah.
worse. Like we've come across a lot of situations. Um, yeah, no
Yeah.
need ever to be embarrassed or scared to be honest with your situation. If you
Mhm.
have bad spending habits, and we see that a lot too. Oftentimes, it's with people nearing retirement, and hey,
Yeah.
what's your budget? What do you think you'll need to live off of? And it's oh, I 3 grand a month. That's all I need. And we're like, okay, well, you're making a lot of money right now. We can see you're not saving a lot of money, which means that you probably spending a lot of money. So, right, they're not being real with what they're spending, and that's kind of like a low level of it. But
Sure.
sometimes they don't even realize that they're being inaccurate. But yeah, you don't have to be embarrassed. Like if you're a huge spender, you're like, listen, I like shoes. I have 200 pairs of shoes, and I spend a lot of money
Wait,
on that.
is
And
that a lot?
yeah,
I'm kidding.
but yeah, there's never any need. You should feel comfortable just like you do with your doctor or other professionals that you're looking to for help.
Yeah. And maybe, for those of us who aren't well versed in anything to do with finances, you don't need to be embarrassed, to say, I don't know what that means. I don't know how to build a credit score. I don't know, how to live within a budget. I've never made a budget. I think a lot of younger adults are coming up in a culture where maybe their parents didn't make good decisions and didn't know how to advise them. And so, we see like the YouTube dads and moms who are teaching people how to sew a button on and, how to manage whatever, how to cook a meal, how to grocery shop. And just like that, you're not supposed to know everything at age 25 or 27 or 40. It's okay. Maybe you had a crisis in your life and now you're facing a new set of circumstances and you need help navigating that. And that's why we go to people who are experts, people who know what they're talking about, because we can't know how to do everything. So, love having you guys on here to talk about that.
Mhm.
Any
Yeah,
other
This
yeah.
questions you have before
Yes,
we
I'm so
go?
sorry. I have one last one.
Do not
So if this
apologize.
guy
No,
now
it's okay.
Are we still
converts
on the
his
guy?
money
It's
into
okay.
yen,
I'm gonna go look
Oh
this
my
guy
god,
up on
it's an
TikTok.
interesting fact. But, no, you said, like, you shouldn't be embarrassed to sorry, that was really funny what you said. Um, you said you shouldn't be embarrassed to tell doctors things. Doctors are held by, like, an oath, and they could get their medical licenses revoked if they spill the tea, like, "Did you hear what this girl did?"
Yeah.
Do you guys have anything like that? Like, or could you go out to dinner later and be like, "Guess what my client was doing the other day?
Y
First name, last name."
so there is
Oh, there
confidentiality.
is?
Yes, there
Okay.
is,
Well, that's
yes,
good to know.
when working with
Question, asking for a friend, can you be subpoenaed in a court case? No, kidding. Yeah, so there's
Uh,
some confidentiality.
yes, there
Yeah.
is
What
confidentiality
if
there.
what if the conversation has nothing to do with finances and the person's like, "My wife is cheating on me. My dog hates me. I wanna leave her. I wanna leave the whole house to my kids." Like, some crazy thing that has something to do with finances. Can you spill the tea on that, or is it covered with the confidentiality thing?
I'd imagine that it's covered with a confidentiality. Um,
It's oddly
it's
specific,
I
Michelle.
don't know.
were they leaving the dog or the wife?
I
I
know.
can't
I'm
remember.
so
The dog was
confused.
mad.
I don't know. Just trying to think of some family
No,
drama.
there's and listen, whether or not it's like officially, covered under that, you wouldn't be in business very long if you went around spilling
Oh,
tea for a lot of people,
That's
right?
okay.
true.
You'd get a bad name around town, and people would recognize that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
at bare minimum, there's a professionalism to keeping things confidential. But
Yeah.
in regards to finances and everything, absolutely, there's
Yeah.
levels to that, and especially that does happen. Some people, maybe, hey, I'm thinking of leaving my spouse. I don't know what to do or what that would look for me. And, clearly we're not going to, go to the spouse and say, hey,
I
you're,
got some
yeah.
news for you.
yeah,
Well,
Yeah.
right.
there yeah, I mean, that's where conflicts of interest come in,
Oh, for sure.
and,
Oh,
maybe
right.
maybe in that case, the conversation needs to say, "Okay, hold on, I need to take a step back as the advisor, address these conflicts of interest before." Yeah, divorce is a big one that can happen in because most
Sure.
of the time, a husband and wife have the same financial advisor,
Yeah, so
right?
you're managing both of their
Oh, wow.
assets.
Right. So then you have to say, okay, there's a clear conflict of interest here, right? That needs to be addressed.
Right.
But
Um,
that's because you're obligated to both of your clients.
e-
It's not just like
exactly.
yeah, you're
Correct.
not taking sides. You're just being
Right.
professional.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a good question. It was
So
a weird question, but the
there's
underlying thing was good.
yeah, there's a lot of legal things that
Right.
come into play in that essence. But
Right.
so, but I
Well,
Well,
went.
this has
thanks, you
been oh, go
guys.
ahead. What did you want
No,
to
I
say?
was just gonna say, just like school. No question is a bad question, right?
Even
That's
my
Well,
and
no, he said it. There's no bad questions.
no take backs.
But because and everybody comes from different backgrounds in regards to financial literacy. When I was in high school, there was not a lot of financial literacy courses out there where, today I'm hearing more and more high schools offering that type of
Mhm.
financial literacy for high school students. But, most people learn about finances from home, and not all people get good advice from their parents because their parents aren't very good with their finances
Sure.
either, right?
Yeah.
So they might not be getting the best advice from their parents. So, um, you know, in that essence, just saying, hey, there's no bad questions.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, and I mean, you may have been someone who grew up in poverty and
yeah,
you didn't know anything about finances because it was all you could do to scrape by
right.
or all your parents could do to scrape by. So yeah, I think just the idea of not being embarrassed to go to someone who knows more than you know and can help you navigate these questions because financial literacy and financial health are so important and everything that we can do to navigate that well and avoid so many of the debt pitfalls um, the failure to invest, all of those pitfalls, it's just so important. So I
Yeah.
really think it's as important as talking about, our physical health and well-being, our mental health, all of those things. Like it's important to get help when we need help, to acknowledge that, there are people along the way that can give us the advice that's so helpful.
Mhm.
So thank
And
you.
and just like you were saying, physical,
Mhm.
right? Just because and it's important to educate yourself, even if you are working with a financial planner, right?
Mhm.
Because just like physical, right? If you go to a trainer and you say, "Hey, I want to lose 30 pounds over the next year," right? It's not the physical trainer's job to show up at your house every morning, make sure you're running 30 minutes every day or
Yeah.
whatever it is to do that. Or, hey, following you around, making sure you're not picking up fast food or something like that. It's, you go to a financial planner to learn what you need to be doing, right?
Yeah.
And there can be a lot of hand holding along the way to do a lot of those things for you, but they can't do everything, especially in regards to your spending or paying off debt. An advisor isn't gonna, they can't block a transaction or anything to say,
Yeah.
"Hey, you can't be making that purchase. It has to go to this debt." There's a lot on your end as well that you need to still be in the picture and still educate yourself.
Yeah. So you learn so that you can then, be personally responsible and also
Yeah.
that you can advocate for yourself and negotiate. Yes. But they're not going to put your credit card in the freezer in a block of ice for you.
Oh,
You
yeah.
have to do that yourself.
Okay, very, very quick. David Goggins, I was listening to somebody on Joe Rogan talk about how they had him come to their house to help them, like, lose a certain amount of weight or, like, train for something, and he lived with this guy for, I think, a month, and he would wake him up at, like, butt cheeks o'clock in the morning, and he'd be like, "Right, we're gonna go on a 3-mile run, and then we're gonna eat this, and then we're gonna do that." Like,
Oh,
he lived with him, and he did everything with him, so it was like he had a shadow, and David even came with him to work and just, like, made sure he was on top of his, routine at work. Has there ever been, or do you think there is or could ever be a financial version of that? Like, you pay this person to come live with you and, like, do a total makeover of your finances with you for a month. Maybe not,
that sounds like
based
a
on
great
the
reality
reaction.
show.
That's not a service we provide.
Okay, alright.
I
Um
cannot comment beyond that. No comment.
Oh,
You're like, I will never provide a service like that ever. I do
Uh,
feel like that's a reality show. You need to find Mr. Beast and see if he'll do that.
yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
Well, thank you so much. We
Mhm.
appreciate you guys both coming on here to talk about this. I've learned a lot, things that I wish I had known when I was a few decades younger. Hopefully, it was helpful for you
Yeah.
right in that sweet spot. Um, yeah, and the next time we're going to talk about people kind of like a little further on in the midpoint of their kind of earning career, maybe having kids, starting to think about college, things like that. So we look forward to that too. So
yeah,
thank
yeah.
you
Us as
guys.
well.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We'll catch you next time.